we're in the book of Ezra, and we'll be there in just a moment after we have our prayer, and then we'll send our little ones to Bible class, and then we'll jump into our study. Really good to see you. It's good to have some folks back that were away for Memorial Day. It's good to have that whole pew really was away, weren't they? You guys just from Mike all the way to Ashley are back. And of course, Bob's back. It's good to have him back with us too. I think that was all we were missing over the holiday weekend, but glad you guys had safe travels and hope you had a really good time away. It's good to go away, but there's no place like home. I think Dorothy said that, didn't she? In The Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home. Click your heels and go back home. Let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll send our young ones to Bible class. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity and the occasion that brings us together tonight to study your word. We are so encouraged by the truth of it, Father. We're just built up and lifted up by you and what you do for us and the great power of your word. Help us tonight as we study the great book of Ezra, that we will get closer to you, Father, knowing more about your promises and trusting you better. Father, please bless our assembly tonight. Bless all those in the hearing of this lesson tonight, Father, those who are online and those who will be even hearing this lesson and studying later in time. We just pray that these eternal truths will build each other and will encourage one another for that eternal home that you're preparing. Father, we rest in your promises. We trust you. We love you. We want to serve you with our whole heart. Help us to do better each day, to live closer to the cross. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, little ones, go to Bible class and have fun. Come down and tell me what you learned. All right, we are in the book of Ezra. We're still dealing with some introductory material because I don't want to just jump into the book of Ezra. It won't really matter. It won't mean as much to us if we don't set the backdrop for it. So you should have an outline. If you don't have an outline from last week, there are some on the table back there, and you can grab one. We are at Roman numeral number 3 on the outline. So we had the past and the plan, and this week we're going to start with the particulars. Now let's kind of just lay just a little bit of a backdrop where we were last week, and then we'll pick up again this week. We noted how difficult times can sometimes really teach us to lean on God. This pandemic has been that. It has been a great blessing if we use it for a blessing. I heard a preacher say today online that I listened to, very, very encouraging blog that I subscribe to and listen to for preachers. He said this, he said, fellas, never let a good pandemic pass you by. And I thought, that's good, I like that. And then he went on to talk about how it can really develop us and shape us and mold us through these hard times. And the church has suffered through this pandemic. We really have. The church has suffered, preachers have suffered, elders have suffered. This has been a very trying time on God's people. But that's okay, because trying times always make for better character when we come out of them. We're coming out of it, hopefully, and that's kind of where we're at in the book of Ezra. God's people had been away for 70 years in Babylonian captivity, and now they're coming back. And they're coming back to really renew the work of God and to get things back focused to where they need to be. Now, there's going to be opposition. I love the book of Ezra because we're going to see opposition like you may have never thought about seeing before. But it's amazing how the people of God rise up and they overcome the opposition. Would you agree with this statement? Life is filled with opposition. Life is filled with opposition. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter where you go. Life is filled with opposition. Some people say, well, I'm going to quit Christianity because I have opposition in Christianity. Well, you go ahead. You quit Christianity. You'll have opposition in the world still, not being a Christian. There is opposition everywhere you go. It is how we rise above and deal with that opposition that really makes us the kind of people to achieve, to succeed, to come through difficult times. And so that's really what the people of God are doing here. They're trying to rise up and come back to a particular situation that was difficult for them. Now, I want you to lay the backdrop here. You remember, the temple is gone. Now, to them, the temple was everything. Okay? You remember the temple was gone. Now, if you go back and read the book of Lamentations, and that's what I hope we can do in this study, is link some of the books of the Bible together. The book of Lamentations was written as a funeral dirge, 5 chapters, basically lamenting the fall of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple. And so it was destroyed. It was terribly destroyed. Everything was destroyed. And it was just basically a burning heap. And Jeremiah most likely was probably on Mount Olivet across the Kidron Valley looking on to Jerusalem when he wrote Lamentations by inspiration. And he was just writing terrible, sad story about Jerusalem and what fell. Now, 70 years later, the people are coming back to that. So it's not burning maybe any longer. Maybe the smoke has ceased, but it's still laying rubble. It's still, the walls are torn down, the temple's torn down, the people of God are separated. And now they're beginning their journey back in the book of Ezra. And we're going to see they have opposition when they get back. They have some opposition. All right, let's look at, we talked about the past and how the southern kingdom of Judah had sinned. God carried them away. He told them it was coming. A lot of the prophets were preaching it. Hey, it's coming. You better straighten your lives up. You better leave these false gods. Start worshiping God. They didn't listen. They didn't listen. They didn't heed the warnings. And so they were carried away. The plan was, though, for God to bring back a remnant. There's always a faithful remnant. Remember that. No matter how bad things get, there's always a faithful remnant. I can choose to be part of that faithful remnant, or I can choose, like some of the Jews in Ezra's day, I don't want to be a part of it. I want to stay back here in Babylon. Some of them did. Some of them chose to stay. Some of them weren't allowed to come back. Some of them weren't allowed to come back because they got so steeped in sin, they still hadn't learned their lesson. God brought a faithful remnant back. That was his plan. His love and his mercy would essentially override the punishment that he gave them. Now let's look at the particulars. Number 3, the particulars. The author. Let's look at the authorship of the book of Ezra. Now, it doesn't come out and tell us that Ezra is the penman, but most people believe that he was. There's, some liberals that would run with this and, try to give us something different. But although he's not specifically mentioned as the author, he's certainly the best candidate. And here's why. There are a couple of things that point to Ezra as the author of the book of Ezra. Number 1, the Talmud. The Talmud essentially is an uninspired, remember it's uninspired, but it's the written text of the oral laws of the Jews. Now, although it wasn't inspired of God, it was still a historical document. And the Talmud adds quite a bit of understanding even to our Bibles. Sometimes it fills in some gaps that God didn't give us because we didn't need it, but it enhances our understanding. So the Talmud says that Ezra wrote the book of Ezra. All right? Again, it's uninspired, so we aren't going to take it for gospel, but that's a pretty good source that it most likely was Ezra. There's a second reason. The authorship most likely points to Ezra because whoever wrote the book had a very strong tie to the priesthood. What's interesting about Ezra is he was a direct descendant of the first high priest, who was Aaron. Ezra 7, 1 through 5 kind of gives his genealogy. And so he's definitely a candidate because he's linked to the priesthood very much. And then there's a third reason. Ezra 7 through 10 is written in the first person. So it's like the guy that's writing Ezra 7 through 10 is the one that is experiencing the things that are going on. And most, it's written through the eyes of Ezra. So most people believe he is the author. Now, I don't get all wound up about authorship. I really don't. Because what I'm more concerned about is 2 Peter 1, 20 and 21. This book of Ezra came from God. Knowing this first, no prophecy of scriptures of any private interpretation. The origin didn't come from man, but holy men of God spake as they were born, carried along by the Holy Spirit. So God is ultimately the author. We believe Ezra was the pen that he used. Number 2, the aim. The aim. What is the aim of the book of Ezra? Restoration. Restoration. Remember that word through the book of Ezra and really through the book of Nehemiah as well. Restoration, the nation and the temple. They've got a lot of work to do. Things are in shambles. And so they've got a lot of work to do coming back. Now here's where we want to kind of link some books of the Bible together. I told our Silver Saints last week something I'm working on. And I don't have any idea when I'll finish it. So just be patient with me. But when I finish it, I promise you're going to have an opportunity to get a copy of it. I think it's really, really important. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go through and link the books of the Bible that you should read together, okay? Because a lot of times what happens when we begin in the book of Genesis, when we begin to read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, we go all the way through. When we're reading books like Ezra, for example, if we don't read books that tie in with the book of Ezra, we'll get to the end of the Old Testament and we'll be scratching our heads saying, I thought I already read this story from a different viewpoint. Well, the book of Ezra really, just to give you an example, should be read with two prophets, Zechariah and Haggai in particular. Because you remember Haggai and Zechariah are the two people that encouraged the work of the building of the temple. It's the same time frame. So if you sort of read the book of Ezra and then you go through, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, you go all the way through, by the time you get to Zechariah and by the time you get to Haggai, sometimes you forget what you were reading back here in Ezra. And so what I'm trying to work on is trying to put sections together. I wouldn't call it a chronological reading of the Bible. There's a lot of those out there, but it's something specific I'm working on. It was based on an article I wrote, and I actually had somebody ask me about it. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that? And I sat down and I looked, and I really don't have anything like that. So I need to make something like that. So I'm coming up with something to try to help us, because that helps me. And I hope it'll help you. Sometimes I get lost in these. I get lost in these books if I don't remember where I'm at. I'm like, what in the world? Wait a minute, where am I at here? And it's because the books of the Bible are put together in the sections. You know the sections, right? Law, history. They're put together in that, but some of them intermix and intertwine. And so if we don't remember that, we're a little bit confused. All right. Restoration of the nation and the temple. The book of Ezra essentially continues the story that you read in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles was God saying, hey, I'm going to fulfill a promise. I'm going to bring people back. In 2 Chronicles, he's taking them away. I'm going to bring them back. That's the promise. Ezra is the fulfillment of that promise. It's the beginning of the fulfillment of that promise, should I say. And so after 70 years in Babylonian exile, the people are coming back, and that's what the book of Ezra is all about. It's about restoration. Restoration. Now, when you restore something, what do? What's the goal of restoration? Take it back to the original. Yeah, make it look like new again. Now, you fellas that are into cars, you know that you don't, and I'm not, so bear with me here. You don't take a Super Sport Nova, okay? Boy, I seen a nice one down. I'm not into cars that much, but I really seen a nice one out at the auto parts store the other day. This Super Sport Nova, I don't know, 72. You crush the fender and you put you sort of bang out the metal and you put a 68 GTO fender on it. Probably wouldn't even fit. I'm not a car guy, but you don't do that, right? If you want to restore a Super Sport Nova, what do? You look all over the world till you find a fender to fit that particular. Doesn't have to be the right color because you're going to bring it back to the metal anyway, but it's got to be the original, right, Mike? You don't reform it, you restore it. And so that's what they're doing here. They're trying to restore. They're going to have to restore the temple. They're going to have to restore the walls. They're going to have to restore the law, and they're going to have to restore the spirituality of the people. There's a task ahead of them that is it's almost insurmountable. It's like, how in the world are they going to do this? But that's what it's about. It's about restoring God's pattern. And by the way, may I say, God has always had a pattern. He still has a pattern. He has a model that he wants to be replicated. Whether it's the church, whether it's the temple, whether it was the walls, whatever it was, he has a pattern, okay? And that's important to remember. All right, any questions on that? Yes, Dan.
I've read somewhere years ago about when they were in Babylonian captivity that the synagogue system started while they were in captivity. And I read a commentary about that some of the folks were, we have a synagogue here, why do we need to go back to Jerusalem? I'm just thinking about it with your pandemic. And well, I got on YouTube, why don't I do that?
Great parallel, Dan. So Dan asked about the synagogue system. That's exactly right, because the temple was destroyed and they had no place to worship. Now you remember, under Judaism, under the Hebrew system, the Old Testament system, it was, I won't say it was all physical. There was some spirituality there. There was some spiritual things. But it was much more physical. Remember, God put his name in Jerusalem and he built the temple. Solomon built the temple there, and God said, that's where my name's going to be. And you come back to Jerusalem and you worship me in the temple. But when the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was no longer really much of a city at this point. They had to figure out some way to worship. And that's exactly right. They come up with the synagogue system where the Jews would still gather to worship. But may I say, that still wasn't God's intent. Now, I think this plays into a part of Acts 17:30. In the times of this ignorance, God winked at or overlooked some things. There's no doubt times God overlooked things because they didn't have all the keys in place like we have today, all right? But that is exactly right. That's when the synagogue system at least first started. And but now they're heading back, and it's going to be a special time for the Jews, very special. And I don't want to link it because it's really a cheap system to link it to the church building and the temple, because they're not the same. They're not the same at all. In fact, what's the temple today? Yeah, right? 1 Corinthians 3, it would be, collective. 1 Corinthians 6, it would be individually. Doug? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we have, when we collectively meet under an oak tree, we're the temple of God, but I'm also like a little chunk of that temple as I walk up to the oak tree, if I might sermonize a little bit. I'm a stone. I'm a stone, Peter would say, in the spiritual house of God, 1 Peter 2. And so I'm a lively stone. So it's not equal to the church, because some people think of the church building as the sanctuary, the temple of God is where we went. Now, this, with all due respect, this building is only a building. Brick, mortar, wood, whatever. Mice, bats, it's got it all, right? I think it does. Then I saw a bat up here one day. I don't know if he still lives around here or not. We haven't been able to convert him, by the way. He just will not listen to the gospel. He's got such an attitude, but that's the way bats are. So, but, it's just a building. We are the temple of God. We are the temple of God. All right, number 3, arrangement. Now this is going to kind of be our point that's going to hang us through the rest of the book. So what I want to do is I want to look at, first of all, to step back with me to when Judah was taken away. When Judah was carried away, they went away in 3 deportments. And this helps us if we understand this. Sometimes we think of Judah being carried away. One day Nebuchadnezzar came in and he said, all right, guys, you're coming with me. And he took them back to Babylon, and that was the end of it. But that wasn't the end of it. There was a big span, quite a bit of big span here between it. In fact, the first deportment, you might say, the first bringing them away was in 606. 606. So here's what he did. And you don't have to worry about the dates as far as I want to get these dates down in my head. I think they're important just for me to understand the story a little bit better, but they're dates. 606, Nebuchadnezzar first came in to Judah, Jerusalem. And what he would have done then is he would have taken away the choice men. Now, you remember some of these men, like Daniel, like Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, okay? Or, as we know, it's funny, we stick with Daniel's Hebrew name, but we always change the 3 boys' name, don't we? We call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was actually their Babylonian names. Daniel became Belshazzar, and we don't usually stick with his name like that, because there's a king over there too, Belshazzar, that'll really confuse us if we get into that too much. But those 4 boys are the ones we know, really, really popular boys, that were carried away. They were made eunuchs. They were made, Babylon tried to force them to eat of the king's dainties. Now, what's big about that is they were Jews. They had kosher system of eating, and so they weren't going to eat the things that the king ate. They weren't going to have bacon and eggs for breakfast. Wouldn't it be terrible to be a Jew? I wouldn't have wanted to be a Jew. I wouldn't have been a good Jew. I love bacon too much, but they weren't going to eat any of that stuff. They weren't going to drink of the beverages of the king. They were going to. And do you remember, now just link this together with in your mind. You remember when you go read the book of Daniel, remember they came after a couple of days? I don't know the exact number of days, I haven't studied it in a while, but came after a few days and looked at Daniel and they're like, man, you're as fat and healthy as everybody. And you're not eating the king's dainties and drinking all his good drinks. You're as healthy as anybody, because he was following God's plan, and God's plan was perfect. So 606, those are the kind of guys he's taking away. He's taking away young guys. Real young guys that he can basically manipulate and do whatever he wants to do with them. Second deportment, 597. Now you will see a little wee bit of variation depending on who you read after. These are the 3 dates that I go with, and for no particular reason is the ones I learned. 597 was the second deportment. Now he's going to take other men away, probably like Ezekiel. Now, you remember Ezekiel went down and he didn't get to go into Babylon like Daniel and those 3 Hebrew boys did. Remember, he had to stay down by the riverbank and prophesy down at the riverbank. And so he was a little older, and he didn't have near the chores that Daniel and those other boys would have. He didn't have all the blessings that Daniel and those other boys would have had. So a little bit older. So if you want to think of it this way, you could kind of think of our, and here again, and this isn't a perfect illustration, but I'm talking about our Joshuas and our Lukes and Dakota, you're going in that deportment too, buddy. 606. We're sorry, but you're leaving, okay? You guys are choice, prime stock. Babylon wants you. Second deportment, he's probably coming more for guys maybe in my age group. Sean, you're probably coming with me. Don't worry, Larry and Steve, you guys are left behind. He doesn't want you right now. Your good years are past. That's the way he's going to look at you, all right? I'm not saying that. Nebuchadnezzar said it. Mike, you're good to go. We're going to leave some of you back there. Doug, you're probably on the brink. We might bring you, but if you get tired along the way, we're kicking you in the river. We're not going to put up with it. And he's going to bring us back because he thinks he can still get a little work out of us. Little does he know, I'm going back on the welfare system of Babylon, but he didn't know that. And then the third deportment, 586, he comes back. He doesn't take very many people with him in this deportment. He basically destroys the temple. You know, the walls have been destroyed. Jerusalem's burning. He basically leaves some of the older guys back there like Jeremiah. Jeremiah's an old man. He had prophesied. Jeremiah had stayed. I mean, he didn't get to go. And Jeremiah just wept over the city of Jerusalem. That's the Book of Lamentations. So you kind of see how this unfolded in three deportments. All right, well, what's neat is what God's going to do is he's going to bring them back in three stages. He took them away in three stages. He's bringing them back in three stages. Now watch this. This will really help our Bible understanding. Number one, the first return comes back under a man by the name of Zerubbabel. Now, don't worry about trying to memorize all this stuff. As we study and as we keep going here and the years build on our Bible knowledge, this will come together and it'll start to click for you. It's like a light bulb. It'll start coming on. Now, Zerubbabel, you're like, spell that for me, huh? Yeah, well, you spell it. Because you look in the Bible, you're going to find all different kinds of spellings. But what's neat about Zerubbabel? Zerubbabel was in the lineage of Jesus Christ. You know when you go to Matthew chapter 1 and you read that, and he begat him, and he begat him, and he begat him, and he begat him. You get down around verse 12, you'll see a man by the name of, in the Old King James, it's Zerubbabel, but it's Zerubbabel, it's the same man. He was in the lineage, so this man that's leading the first captive of captives back, the first group of captives back, is going to be in the lineage of Jesus Christ. That's really cool to me. He's a leader, and he's also going to lead sort of the genealogy back to Jesus Christ. Now, in this first return, all right, there is 49,897 captives come back. 49,897. Most people round that up, say about 50,000 Jews. 50,000 captives came back. So a big section of Jews comes back with Zerubbabel. All right? Joshua is also another man, now not the same Joshua that wrote the book of Joshua, but a different Joshua, comes back as well. And we'll see some of the things about him as we study our Old Testaments. He was a really great character as well. He was a great guy. First return is in 538 BC. Okay, you can jot that down. It just helps me to keep my mind straight. Okay, 538 BC, here comes the second, or the first return back. All right, so they come back. Now, that is essentially, stick with me here, and if I lose anybody, throw your hand up. That's essentially the first 6 chapters of the book of Ezra. That's 6 chapters of Ezra. Zerubbabel, Joshua, and 50,000 Jews come back. Now, what are they working on? Well, what was our key word? Restoration. First thing they're going to do, and we're going to see this in our study. This is just background material right now, but when we get into it, we're going to see it. First thing they do is they reinstate sacrifice. We got to lay a foundation for the altar. We've got to start sacrificing to our God. First thing they do. Second thing they work on is the temple. They want to finish the temple, but it's really neat. It's funny. It's a funny story. When they start working on the temple, right away, there's a bunch of naysayers. And I had to chuckle. I chuckle every time I study this section of Scripture. It doesn't matter. Listen to me now. It doesn't matter what you do that's positive. There'll always be somebody to be negative about it. Do you agree with that? That is one of the frustrating parts of life to me. But it had to be very frustrating for Zerubbabel. Had to be very frustrating for the people of God. They're finally back. They're ready to build a temple. And now there's a bunch of enemies and we're going to see it when we study it, they caused all kinds of grief for the people of God. I mean, some really low-down shenanigans. Remember, the world doesn't play fair. These enemies didn't play fair. But God's people were God's people, and they rose above it. Temple was built. All right. Second return. All right. Now the second return happens, and this is under Ezra, the man that we're going to, that bears his name in the book. 7 through 10. Chapter 7 through 10. Ezra brings the second return back. And this is in 458. So what is that? 538, 458, what is that, 80 years? I never do good at counting backwards. I am not a math man. Dakota, don't worry, I'm not a math man. So whatever the years are between 538, do it real quick in your head and tell me. It's, Jill, where are you at? Jill's great with numbers. She's our numbers girl. So somebody help me out with that. 538, 458. Yeah, like it's almost 80 years. I think it's about almost 80 years. So if you think about that, like sometimes we think about, well, the people came back, they started building, had a little bit of one day of opposition, but no, there's 50,000 people come back with Zerubbabel and Joshua, and they start building, and they have opposition, and the temple does get completed, and then 80 years later, here comes Ezra and a group of people back, and he brings about 1,754 back with him. They come back, and now they're essentially going to restore the nation. The nation, okay? I kind of look, me, I always like to give it the first letters of everything. So I kind of look at Ezra 1 through 6 as the sanctuary. And then I look at Ezra 7 through 10 as the spirituality. So he's going to build the spiritual nature of the people after they build the sanctuary. When we talk sanctuary, we're talking temple. We're talking place to worship God. That, by the way, the second return, by the way, came as Artaxerxes I was on the throne, Persian king. Now, quick trivia question for you. Who was the Persian king that said, okay, Jews, go ahead, you can go back now? God named him by name before he was even born. Cyrus. So Cyrus began it, and Cyrus is going to be key. One thing the Medes and the Persians did that's awesome, and sometimes we learn these facts, but we don't really, I should say me, not you. Sometimes I learn these facts, but I don't link them together. But this is really neat. The Medes and the Persians were great at keeping records. They were phenomenal at keeping records. Not only that, when they stamped the law into place, it was a law that could not be changed. I mean, it had to have like 2 votes from Congress, 16 votes from their wives, and 3 votes from their kids in order to get it changed. I mean, it was really a big deal once a law was made. Now, when you go read the book of Daniel, you'll read about that, right? Well, it's according to the law of the Medes and Persians. What's the big deal about that? When it's a law, man, it's a law. Okay, here's what's neat. Cyrus is a Persian king, and he says, God used him. He was in God's hands. God says, all right, Cyrus, you're going to send the people back. Now, Cyrus didn't hear that from God. Cyrus is acting within his realm as a king. God's behind the scenes, providentially working for his people, and Cyrus says, you guys can go home. Well, he writes it down. He writes it down in the annals. Told the Jews they can go home. Okay, I'm sermonizing. I'm just making it real simple. Told the Jews they could come home. Okay. Well, then when Artaxerxes, which is about 6 kings down, you just look that up, Google that, you'll see all the kings of Persia. He's 4 or 5 kings down from Cyrus. Artaxerxes, when they begin to build the temple, the enemies come. Now remember this, so we're going back and study a little deeper. But the enemies come and they say, hey, wait a minute, those troublemaking Jews, they're going to rebel. You know how they are. Look in the annals of history. You'll see how they rebel. Artaxerxes is going to say, well, hold on a minute, I'll check it out. And he checks it out and he said, yeah, those Jews were rebellious. Stop the work right now. So the government now is against them. Okay? You with me? But it still almost makes you want to jump off your chair, doesn't it? Isn't this amazing? What? I'll tell you what, this is almost like it was written yesterday. But it wasn't. The ink's been dry for thousands of years, but it's amazing the government was against them. We can't build. We've got government opposition. We've got people opposition. We got all these things to do. God, what are we going to do? Artaxerxes says, wait a minute, I'm going to go back to the law. I'm going to check something out. And he went back because the Jews kind of complained. They said, wait a minute, Cyrus told us we could come back, and Cyrus told us we could build the temple. He said, all right, hold on a minute, I'll go back and check. And he went back and checked the annals of the Medes and the Persians under this fact. Oh yeah, Cyrus did send you back, okay? Now, spoiler alert, but I can't wait, it's so fun. He says, all right guys, you can go ahead and build. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to tax the people. All the enemies that were giving you grief, we're going to tax them, and we're going to take that money and put it toward the temple building. Huh? Now, why'd I say that? Because that's how my God works. That's how he works. He takes opposition. We can't get by this roadblock. I can't believe this is happening. We'll never build the church in this atmosphere. God says, you just hold on. You keep the candlestick burning bright. You keep forging ahead. You keep your hand to the plow. And who knows, I might have those old heathens paying to build it. That's amazing to me. I love that story. And that's what happens when we put our faith and our trust in God. Back to the pattern. God said, do it and I will bless you. When God has something in mind, listen, nobody can thwart it. Nobody can thwart God's plan. Let me tell you, the gospel will still go forth in this world. The church will still stand. Daniel said it was a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Never. We're not going anywhere. Now, there's individual congregations falling off. I had to hear about that today, too. We were talking about that with a guy on Skype, or what's that thing? What's that other Zoom meeting? Zoom. And we were talking about some of the congregations that have fallen by the wayside. But you know what? A congregation may fall. A congregation may go into apostasy. But the church won't fall. Now, can I just give you a little bit of something just to supercharge you? A little vitamin B12. God made the church to be autonomous. We use that word, sometimes we don't explain it. It simply means we are self-governing, and essentially, with love I say this, we don't answer to another congregation, and another congregation doesn't answer to us. So, let's use Camp Hill as an example. I'm only using Camp Hill on the internet. I'm only using Camp Hill because I have a friend that preaches there, and I know of that congregation. I know they're a sound congregation. Let's say Camp Hill. Let's say Camp Hill goes off the path. They're not going off the path. They're a good sound congregation, is the best of my knowledge, and I love them. I'm in fellowship with them. I'm using them as an example. If they would go off the path, the church doesn't fall because we still can stand. We're not linked to them other than in the fellowship of the gospel. So if they go off, what happens? Our fellowship breaks. They sink. They go away. If they leave the book, they go away. What do? We stick with the book. We float. We stay true to the Bible. We aren't going to fall. Now you tell me, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, man, the wisdom of God. The wisdom of God. And so as such, we don't tell them what to do. They don't tell us what to do. We all come back. And so this is what happens. Some people say, what does the Church of Christ believe? What do they believe on this? It's the wrong question. What's the Bible teach on that? And if we're a faithful Church of Christ, you know what we'll do? We'll be a pillar and ground of truth, 1 Timothy 3:15. We'll uphold the truth. That's what a pillar and ground does. It holds up the truth. Truth doesn't originate with me. Truth doesn't originate with you. I'm so glad about that. When I preach the truth, you know who it originated with? It originated in the mind of God. Now all you have to do is check it out. If what I'm telling you on Sundays and Wednesdays is truth, it's because it came from God. It didn't come from me. Doug? And that's a great illustration, Doug. I just have to say I'm excited about the books, the 7 churches in Asia, because I've been compiling material on them, and I'm going to launch into a series soon from the pulpit on the 7 churches of Asia, because they teach us a lot. They teach us a lot about individual congregations and what we need to be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And so that'll be coming one of these days down the road. Again, don't ask me when, because I've got so many things on the back burner boiling right now. I need another stove. My burners are all taken up, but that's okay. That's a good place for me to be. I know where I need to be spiritually, and that's where I need to be. All right, second return under Ezra. That is Ezra 7 through 10. Ezra 1 through 6, first return, 50,000 Jews under Zerubbabel and Joshua. Second return, about 80 years later, under Ezra, and it comes back with about 1,754 Jews. Third return is under Nehemiah. So that's going to close the book of Ezra. But we're studying Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther together because the book of Nehemiah is the third return. That's going to happen in about 444 BC. So about, I don't know, so many years later. A few years later, Nehemiah comes back. Now, just real quick, we're not into Nehemiah yet, but what does Nehemiah do? What's his main focus? Yeah, and if you want to remember that, you just do stupid things like me, okay? If your mind thinks like me, we're both in trouble, but this will work for you, all right? I just think of a knee I just think of a knee, and when I lift my knee, I think of a knee-high wall. Now, please don't think that that's how high the wall was. It wasn't, but that's how I remember knee-high Nehemiah walls. That's how I remember it. So when I read the book of Nehemiah, I know I'm dealing with walls. All right? When I read the first part of the book of Ezra, 1 through 6, I know I'm dealing with the temple. When I read 7 through 10, I know that I'm dealing with the people. And so if you've got that, you've got Ezra and Nehemiah down. Now, there's a lot more in there, I know, but that's a capsulated version of it, and you kind of got them in your mind now, okay? All right, let's keep moving. Chronologically, the events of Esther. Now, stick with me. Wait a minute. You're talking about Ezra, talking about Nehemiah. Now, what are you bringing up Esther for? All right. Esther, chronologically, comes in a 10 to 12-year period during the first and second returns. So through Ezra 1 through 6, first return, Ezra 7 through 10, second return, between those two times, somewhere in that time frame, we have the dates, but somewhere in that time frame, the book of Esther happens. Now, Esther is one of those books that a lot of times we read and we studied it a little bit and we kind of know, Esther was the queen. She became the queen providentially. She saved the Jews from genocide. And you think about like Mordecai and you think of Haman. Haman was the bad guy and he ended up getting hanged on his own gallows. But we're going to study the book of Esther too, because what happens is it's really all about restoration and building God's people. And what's neat is every one of the books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, they're all filled with trouble. They're all filled with pandemics. They're all filled with problems. And how in the world can God's people survive? And it's like Henny Penny running around saying, the sky's falling. God said, stop it. The sky's not going to fall. You're going to come back. You're going to build the temple. Zerubbabel and Joshua, that's what you're going to do. Ezra, you're bringing people back. They're going to spiritually be built back up. Nehemiah, you're building the walls around the city. And you know what, Esther? You're going to save the rest of the Jews that are in Persia. And you're going to actually complete my plan. And when we study these three books together, you know what it speaks of? It speaks of providence and promise. And that's what I need. That's what I need to see in God. Sometimes I view God as this man in the sky that's just telling me what to do and what not to do. But that's not God. God is a God of providence and promise. Yes, there are laws that come with that. Yes, there are regulations. There are thou shalt nots and there are thou shalts. But God is a God of mercy and love. And these three books are going to show that so clearly to us. Why was the Old Testament written? Romans 15:4 is written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope, Paul said. That's why we're studying these books, because they give us hope. They give us encouragement. And I think this is a great time to study them. Questions? Comments? Everybody with me? All right, because I know when we get into the historical stuff, sometimes can I share something with you? When I was a little bit younger and preachers started getting into the historical stuff, you know what I did? There's a switch right back here I can flip on and I can flip off. And I used to flip it off because I was like, all right, Xerxes who? What are you talking about? Persia? What? I don't know anything about that stuff. All right? But I want you to stick with me. I don't want you to flip the switch off. Don't do like I did, because this is easily understood. It really is. Once we lay this out and as we keep going, you'll see God's plan in this, and you'll see God's providence and His promises come forward. Okay? All right. Let me give you your homework. We're not done. We've got a couple of minutes yet, but I want to give you your homework because I don't want to forget. Your homework for next week, real simple. Read Ezra 1, 2, and 3. Ezra 1, 2, and 3. Read those three chapters. Now, here's something that's kind of neat. When you get to chapter 2, spoiler alert, you don't have to read it verbatim, okay? I loved it when my instructor said that. When you get to chapter 2, you don't have to read that verbatim. Just kind of look over. I'm not going to test you on it. Oh, I love that. You know what I did, don't you? I read 1 and then skipped to 3. I didn't even look at 2. Look at 2, but don't get all bogged down in it, because what he's doing is he's listing all the names of the different tribes, and he's adding up all the people. And if you add them all up, by the way, in chapter 2, you're going to come out to 49,897. And you say, how do you know that, preacher? Because I read it twice in 2 different commentaries, but yes, this afternoon I sat down with a calculator and I added them up because I wanted to make sure what I was telling you was right. And it is. The 2 commentators I read after were exactly right. So that's what we're going to do. Next week, Ezra 1, 2, and 3. All right, let's jump into the outline. And this is the outline that we're going to expand when we go through it, okay? This is the outline. Here it is. Ezra 1 through 6. Now, you already knew this was coming. Nation is restored. All right, tell me, who's coming back? Ezra 1 through 6. Who comes back? You got a couple of choices. Who is it? Zerubbabel. Joshua with him, and who else? Well, there's a bunch of people coming with him. About how many? About 50,000, about 50,000. So you can see this big scat of people coming from Babylon all the way back to Jerusalem, and they're bringing, and think about this, 70 years. What would have happened in 70 years? What changed in your life in 70 years? I mean, wouldn't that there would have people died in Babylon. I mean, they would have had graves back there. You can see a guy walking back with his family, his wife, and his kids that are now grown, and his grandkids. Well, why are they grown? Because I had them when I first went to Babylon. So they're 60-some years old maybe. And he's got grandkids that are 40-some years old. And he's coming back with his whole family. Yeah, my mother and my grandmother, their graves are back in Babylon. So, I mean, sometimes when we think about why didn't they just leave Babylon and run back to Jerusalem? That was their home. Well, for 70 years, it wasn't their home. For 70 years, Babylon became many of their homes. And so, when you live in a place 70 years, you have a tendency to tie some roots there. And it's difficult sometimes to leave. So let's be patient with these Jews. There was part of their heart was back there. I mean, it really was. All right, Ezra 1-6, nations restored. Here we come. Zerubbabel and Joshua and 50,000 people are coming back. Hebrews return under these two men. Chapters 1 and 2 are going to talk about that return, those men coming back. Chapter 3-6, and we're just encapsulating the outline right now, just as we close. The house is rebuilt. By the house, we're referring to the temple of God. It's going to be rebuilt. Now, I want you to notice what I have under that. So, do I have 1, 2, and 3, 4 on your outline, or do I have blanks? Okay, here they are. You ready? So, the house rebuilt, 3-6. Now, underneath that, these 4 are going to really help us. Number 1, the work commences. Work commences, chapter 3. Work commences. Work commences, chapter 3. Number 2, work is countered, chapter 4. So they just get started. They just get started building in chapter 3. The work commences, and now there's going to be a bunch of naysayers on the outside causing trouble. And it's going to neat. You're going to watch how they cause trouble. They first want to join with them. Well, let us come up here and help you. Well, we mean real well. We're just trying to do the best we can. You're a bunch of troublemakers. You don't have the heart right. You're nothing but a bunch of dividers. They didn't want to come up there and build. Now listen, that happens. And sometimes that happens in the church. And so we have to be vigilant. We all have to be vigilant, because how easy would it have been for me to become friends with one of those guys? Yeah, you know what? I don't think Zerubbabel's doing that good a job anyway. I think he could do a better job. And I'll tell you what, we've been away. We were away in 70 years. And yeah. You know how bad that is. You know what they were doing? They were gossiping back and forth and complaining and murmuring. Let me ask you a question. How much work was getting done in the temple when those people were complaining, murmuring? That's all they were, was a distraction. You remember that, okay? Sometimes the devil will set his little army in, and there'll be a distraction. Here's what I say. They distract me too. I get distracted. Here's what I say. I keep my hand to the plow. I'm going to keep my focus, because I want to go to heaven. I know the dissenters and the dividers aren't going to heaven. I want to go to heaven, so I've got to somehow get past them. That's what they had to do here. Work commences, chapter 3. Work is countered, chapter 4. Number 3, work continues, chapter 5. Now we're going to get it started back up again. Now we're going to get things rolling. Number 4, the work is completed, chapter 6. Man, this is great, because now they're going to start sacrificing to God. Now, real quick as we close, there are 3 feasts that they're going to keep, and we're going to read this in our study. 3 feasts that the Jews were going to keep when they got back. What were they? Anybody remember? Feast of Tabernacles. Passover. Come on now, you're good. You know this one because you hear it all the time, and sometimes we have no clue what we're even saying. We'll say the church began on the Pentecost. Pentecost is a Jewish feast. It's a Jewish feast. And so we've got Pentecost, Passover, and the Feast of Weeks, or the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. And that was to remember and commemorate their time in the wilderness wandering. You folks tell me this book isn't from God. You read about the wilderness wandering all the way back in the book of Numbers. We forgot about that, right? By the time we get to Ezra, God said, no, remember it. I've told you about those feasts. This book is divinely inspired. All right, here we go. I'm just going to give you the next section of the outline, and then we'll conclude for tonight. Ezra, did everybody get those? Okay, 4 things that are worked. All right, Ezra 7 to 10, the people are rededicated. So in the first 6 chapters, first 3 through 6, the house is rebuilt. Chapters 7 through 10, the people are rededicated. Because remember, now that we got the physical house built, the temple, now that we got sacrifice going back up, we've still got people that their hearts are far from God. And that's why I said a couple minutes ago, that, sometimes we think of the Old Testament, everything was physical, but it wasn't all physical. Now, I know there was much more physical, the physical sacrifices and the physical temple and the physical burning of incense, and there was definitely more physical. But the people still needed to be rededicated. The people need to get their hearts right. And this is where they're going to do it. All right, here we go. There's 3 parts under here I want you to notice. Number 1, or letter A, captives return under Ezra. Okay? You say, wait a minute, captives return? I thought they already returned. Well, they did, 50,000 of them, but now we're going to have 1,700 of them come back under Ezra. Okay? Second part of the book. So we've got the captives return under Ezra, chapter 7 and 8. Remember, people are getting rededicated. What do they have to do? Chapter 9, you see this coming? Confession of sin. Chapter 9 is it's one of the great chapters in the book of Ezra. The people, listen, this week you're only supposed to read chapter 1, 2, and 3, right? Okay. But if you want to really read something that's really neat, if you want to know what confession is, if you want to know, God, when I sin, what do I do? Let me tell you what I like to do when I sin. Hey, God, if I did anything, to you, I'm sorry. That's nice, isn't it? You read chapter 9, you'll see what they did. They confessed, and they broke their hearts, and they said, God, we did this, and we did that. Will you please forgive us? Chapter 9 is confession of sin. Chapter 10, here it is, the cleansing of sin. Well, chapter 10 is kind of a hard chapter for some people, but it's cleansing of sin. God had to get some things right. And this is what he told him to do. When we get there, we'll talk about that. Any questions or comments? I'm telling you what, the book of Ezra has filled me up. And I thank you so much for coming tonight and let me share a little bit of what I've been able to study with you. And I hope that it's making sense. If you have any questions, if you get lost along the way, seriously, if you get any frustrated, like I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about there, stop me and we will sit down and talk, because I know what that's like. I've been there. And when I get lost, I'm completely lost, and I don't want you to be lost. I want to explain it like I can understand it, and I know if I can understand it, then you hopefully can understand it too. Hey, looking forward to being with you on Sunday. Let's pray for one another. Let's lift each other up in encouragement this week. Sunday will be here before you know it, and we'll come to bow before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I'm excited about Sunday. We've got a new sermon coming Sunday. Hold on to your seats, bring your Bibles with you, and I can't wait for it. Thank you so much for coming tonight. You people are wonderful. I love you.